Welcome back. So this lesson, what I kind of want to do is I want to say add with valid location calls add on DbContext. So I want to make sure that when I add a new location that is valid, it should just call the DbContext. Now there's a lot of things that actually pops up right here. For instance, we should actually start looking at helpers. We should reuse some helpers that we already built earlier and stuff like that. We're going to dive into that later. But right now, I just want to talk about one thing right here because I have this annoying as iLocation repository in some of my text right here. And I also kind of cast it right here. I did that again, if you guys remember, to kind of force it into be an iLocation repository. I don't want to do that anymore because now you guys learned a new trick. So in the future, whenever you create a new class, you should just make something like this. Location repository should implement iLocation repository and then just use the be assignable to that you just learned last lesson. Very, very simple test right here. And then I don't need to have this as iLocation repository stuff in here. I can also kind of remove the as keyword because I already got myself right here that this is not possible to do unless you have the iLocation repository. Now, if you're in any area where you kind of need to still explain to the system that this add right here should specifically be from the iLocation repository, then of course you can just add that again, or either here you can just add it as an iLocation repository, or you can say as iLocation repository like that. I know that was kind of a side note, but I want you guys to see that so you don't need that long text in there with the as blah 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 blah. You don't need that. Let's just add this simple method to make sure that we always use and location repository always is of the type iLocation repository, okay? Okay, let's get to the actual test right here because we need to verify something. And when we need to verify stuff, we need a mock. So I'll make a context right here, mock context. There we go, and that'll be a new mock, and we want that mock to be of the type egg production DbContext like we have up here, right? Now we're not going to call .object yet because we don't need that object until we actually start creating the repo. So I'll make a new repo right here. I'll make a new location repository repo, and again, notice I'm not going to call as this this as keyword for an iLocation repository. I'm just going to call the repo, and I'm going to say object in here instead, because now I have the mock available and I can use that to verify that we actually call that method. Now the final thing I want to do is I just want to make a simple location right here that's going to be a new location, and I'm going to pass in the information for a basic location. I know that is valid, so let's just add, we can actually add an ID first just for the fun of it. I'm going to add an ID of 0. That's going to be the JSON I'm going to get at some point from a backend. I'm going to add the address of the street. Right now again, here's why I'm saying we could actually reuse the other helper we have, but right now that's in another package, so we kind of have to go and fix that later. But let's just kind of make this work, and then we can go and refactor our code later. And the owner is John Doe, and there we go. Now we have some valid location right here, and the final thing I want to do is I want to just call rebo.add, and then let's send in that location we just built. And the final thing, verify, we called add function. And what we're going to verify is the actual context, right? The contexts.add function should be called at least one time. So now that we have that ×1 in here, also I want to kind of pass in the actual location right here that I want to add. So again, you have to remember that I'm testing two things right here. I'm testing that when I actually call the repo's add function, I wanted to call the contexts add function with that location, right? So again, that's the first proof. The second proof is that I only want to call it one time. Now, of course, when I run this, now it should fail. Let's just try and run this test, run unit test, and hopefully we'll see it failing now, because again, you have to remember we always have to make our tests fail before we actually make them pass. And there we go. And if you read this, it should call it once, but it actually called it 0 times down here. So let's go and fix that. Now let's jump into our location repository right here, and let's actually fix it right away. Now, first of all, in order to even do this, I need access to the context, like I said in the beginning. So let's make a local reference for that context so we can start using it. And let's just make it equal context right here, make a local reference, and there we go. And let's even make it read-only right here just to make it clear that after you initialize this class right here, you can never change that context right there. And the second thing I want to do is now I want to actually call the add function. I'm not doing that yet. So let's call the actual add on the context with that location that I'm getting from the outside. Now, this should make the test pass, right? Because again, I'm saying when you call the add function on the repository, then you should call the contexts add function with the location you're passing in from the outside. That was my test, and you should only call it once. Let's try and check out the unit test, and you'll notice because I have this auto run all unit test, it already told me this is now a success, and I'm happy. But let's try and just test this to see if I'm actually wrong. What if I called it twice by mistake, right? What would happen? Well, let's have a look at the unit test again. It'll try and run it, and now it should fail, because now I'll call it 2 times, it should only be called once. So I'm actually guiding myself not only that I call it, but also how many times. And I know that might seem trivial, but when you start having more complex system, you can actually start really diving into how many times are everything actually called. For instance, if you had a list, you could make sure that it only calls it 10 times if there are 10 items in the list, right? And stuff like that. So we'll dive more into that later. But let's end it right here, because now we have a unit test that proves that when I actually go and call on the repository, when I go and I call this add with a location that's valid, it should actually verify that it's called 1 time. So that's it for this lesson. See you next time. Have fun.